The Appalachian Mountains of Pikeville, Kentucky, loomed tall and silent in 1891, their ridges cloaked in fog. Travelers passing through the narrow mountain roads often found themselves at the mercy of nature, sudden storms, falling rocks, and nights so black you could not see your hand before your face. It was here that the mountain inn stood, a leaning structure of timber and stone. Smoke curled from its chimney, the smell of stew always drifting on the wind. To tired travelers, the sight was a blessing. To locals, it was a curse. They said, "At the mountain inn you may get a bed, but you'll never rise from it." The inn belonged to two men, Ezekiel Hargrove, the elder, broad-shouldered and grim, and his younger brother Jonah, quiet and always watching with restless eyes. They kept to themselves, never laughed, and carried an air of secrets heavier than the mountains around them. The Hargroves hadn't always been innkeepers. Their story was whispered in Pikeville, born to a coal miner father and a mother who stitched clothes for pennies. When the mine collapsed in 1875, their father never came home. Their mother wasted away in grief and hunger, and the boys, hardly more than children, often went days without food. Neighbors remembered finding them scavenging scraps, their ribs pressing against thin shirts. Hunger left a scar deeper than any wound. It taught Ezekiel cruelty. It taught Jonah silence. By the time they became men, they had inherited the inn, and a bitterness that festered into something unspeakable. Despite its cracked shutters and crooked porch, the mountain inn drew travelers. Peddlers, coal men, loggers, even families on wagons passing through the rugged terrain. The Hargroves offered a warm fire, a bed stuffed with straw, and above all, the stew. Every night, the iron pot simmered. The broth was thick, the meat tender, the flavor rich in a way people couldn't place. "You won't taste anything like it again," Ezekiel would say with a grin that never reached his eyes. They were right. No one ever did. One autumn evening, a traveling peddler named Silas Boone came to stay. He was seen in town earlier that day, laughing and playing fiddle in the square. By morning, he was gone. His horse was found grazing by the creek, his wagon abandoned. The Hargroves told the sheriff he settled his bill and left before dawn. But townsfolk noticed Ezekiel wore a new coat the next week, the very one Silas had been seen in. Whispers grew, yet proof was thin as fog. The inn remained open. Travelers kept arriving. Some left, others didn't. On a stormy March evening, a young woman rode up to the inn, rain soaking her bonnet and cloak. She introduced herself as Clara Whitfield, a schoolteacher bound for the mountain schoolhouse. She was no older than 22, her face pale from the cold, but her eyes held warmth. Clara was unlike the usual rugged travelers. She carried books tied in twine, a Bible wrapped in cloth, and a letter from her mother folded neatly in her bag. She believed in knowledge, kindness, and God's providence, virtues that seemed out of place in a world of hunger and suspicion. Ezekiel eyed her like prey. Jonah looked at her like a memory of something long lost. Clara sat by the fire, warming her hands, while Jonah ladled stew into her bowl. She thanked him with a smile that startled him. Guests rarely looked at Jonah with kindness. Most saw him as a shadow behind his brother. As she ate, she noticed how Ezekiel stared at her, his jaw tense. Jonah avoided her gaze, yet his hands trembled when she asked about the mountains. She sensed unease, but spoke gently. That night, lying on her straw mattress, she whispered a prayer. Something told her this inn carried darkness, but she also felt a strange pull, as though she had arrived here for a reason greater than chance. In the kitchen, the brothers argued in low voices. "She'll be like the others," Ezekiel growled. "No one will miss her in these hills." Jonah shook his head. "She's different. She speaks to me as if I matter." "Ezekiel, we don't have to keep doing this." Ezekiel slammed his fist on the counter. "And starve? Go back to eating bark and scraps? You think the world cares if we live or die? We do what we must." But Jonah's resolve was weakening. Clara's kindness had cracked something inside him, the same place hunger once hollowed out. Back in Pikeville, Sheriff Henry Thompson sat at his desk, tallying names. A dozen travelers missing in the last 2 years, and the Mountain Inn was the thread connecting them all. "The Hargroves know more than they say," muttered Deputy Allen. Thompson rubbed his chin. He wasn't a man quick to accuse, but the weight of disappearances pressed heavy. He resolved to ride to the inn, unannounced, within the week. Rumors spread faster than the creek after a storm. By the time the sheriff saddled his horse, half the town was already convinced the Hargroves were guilty of something unspeakable. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the cracks of the inn. Clara couldn't sleep. She kept hearing noises, the creak of floorboards, dragging sounds, the dull thud of something heavy being moved. Holding a candle, she slipped from her room. The cellar door stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The smell hit her first, metallic, thick, and wrong. Her candlelight flickered over piles of belongings. A silver pocket watch, worn boots, a child's locket, the belongings of the missing. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a cry. The truth was worse than any rumor. At dawn, Clara confronted Jonah in hushed tones by the fire. Her voice trembled. "I know. I saw the cellar." Jonah froze. His eyes, usually downcast, met hers with a torment she had never seen in another soul. He didn't deny it. Instead, tears welled up. He confessed everything. How hunger had driven them years ago to kill a lone traveler. How Ezekiel discovered no one asked questions if a man vanished in the mountains. How their stew became different. Jonah's voice broke. "I hate it, Miss Clara. Every night I hear their screams. But Ezekiel, he says it's the only way. If I fight him, he'll kill me too." Clara's heart ached. She should have recoiled, but instead she whispered, "You are not beyond redemption, Jonah, but you must choose." In that moment, Jonah felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope, faint but alive. 2 days later, hooves echoed on the muddy path outside. Sheriff Henry Thompson and 2 deputies rode up to the inn, rifles strapped across their saddles. Ezekiel greeted them at the door with a forced grin, his apron still stained from stew. "Well now, Sheriff, what brings you this far up the mountain?" Ezekiel drawled. The sheriff's eyes scanned the dim room. Clara sat stiffly by the fire, her hands clasped tight. Jonah busied himself at the stove, shoulders hunched. "We're following up on disappearances," the sheriff said plainly. "Your inn seems to be the last stop for many." Ezekiel chuckled darkly. "These mountains swallow men whole, Sheriff. Folks go missing all the time. Ain't my fault if they wander off." The sheriff's gaze lingered. Something was wrong here. He felt it. Clara's heart pounded. Should she speak now, or wait for a safer moment? That night, Clara could bear it no longer. She slipped a folded scrap of paper into the sheriff's hand as he prepared to leave. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling, "read this when you're alone." It was Jonah's confession, hastily scrawled in her neat teacher's hand. Every detail was there: the cellar, the belongings, the stew. The sheriff nodded solemnly, giving no sign to Ezekiel. As he mounted his horse, he tipped his hat to Clara. She prayed silently that she had not signed her own death warrant. Ezekiel, however, watched her with eyes as sharp as a blade. He sensed betrayal in the air. The sheriff returned 3 nights later with 6 deputies. They entered with warrants and rifles. "Search the place," Thompson ordered. Ezekiel roared in protest, grabbing for his shotgun, but deputies wrestled him down. Jonah, trembling, didn't resist. Clara stood in the corner, her breath shallow. The cellar door was thrown open. Lantern light spilled onto the horror below. Piles of clothing, bones scattered among barrels, blood dried dark on the floor. The room stank of rot and secrets too long hidden. The deputies gagged. The sheriff turned to Ezekiel. "You'll hang for this." Ezekiel spat at his boots. Jonah whispered only one thing: "I'm sorry." News spread across Kentucky like wildfire. The Hargrove brothers became a legend of terror, the Macabre Brothers of Pikeville. The courthouse filled with angry townsfolk. Mothers clutched children, fathers clenched fists. Ezekiel stood tall, sneering at accusations, never once showing remorse. Jonah, by contrast, hung his head. His shackled hands shook as he confessed again. "I am guilty, but I never wanted it." Hunger. Hunger turned us into beasts. When Clara testified, the room fell silent. She spoke not with vengeance, but with sorrow. "I saw the evil, yes. But I also saw the broken children they once were, boys who knew only hunger and cruelty. That does not excuse their crimes, but it explains the road that led them here. Some wept, others scowled. Clara's words forced the town to confront a bitter truth. Monsters are often made, not born." The jury returned swiftly. Ezekiel Hargrove was sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. Jonah, though spared the rope, was condemned to life in prison. When the verdict was read, Ezekiel cursed the judge, shouting that he would be remembered. Jonah simply wept. Clara walked from the courthouse with heavy steps. Justice had been done, but it brought no joy. The missing could not return, yet she hoped Jonah's spark of conscience meant something could still be saved, if only a shred of his soul. Months later, Clara received an envelope with her name in clumsy handwriting. It was from the prison. Inside was a letter from Jonah. "Miss Clara, I don't expect forgiveness, but you saw me as a man, not just a monster. Because of you, I found the courage to speak with the prison chaplain. I pray now. I read the good book. Sometimes I even smile. You gave me back a piece of myself I thought was gone forever. Thank you." Clara's eyes blurred with tears. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her Bible. It was proof that even in the darkest cell, a glimmer of light could grow. The mountain inn, once buzzing with travelers, fell silent. Windows shattered, the roof sagged, vines crawled up its walls. Locals avoided it, whispering it was cursed by the souls of the missing. But Clara, one spring afternoon, walked up the winding road and stood before it. The wind rattled the shutters like the voices of ghosts. She bowed her head in prayer, not just for the victims, but for the brothers too. "Lord, may no heart be driven by hunger to such darkness again." With that, she turned away, vowing never to return. Clara poured her energy into the schoolhouse. Her students were children of miners, farmers, and widows, children who knew the sting of hunger as she once had. She made sure no child left class without food. She spent her own meager salary on bread and apples, keeping little for herself. To her, education without compassion meant nothing. When she taught them to read, she slipped in lessons of kindness. "The world can be cruel," she told them softly, "but you must never let cruelty live in you." In her heart, she knew every lesson was also for Jonah, the boy inside the man who had once been lost. Years rolled on. Clara aged, her hair streaked with silver. One winter morning, a letter arrived from the prison chaplain. Jonah Hargrove had died of illness behind the walls. But in his final years, he became a teacher to other inmates. He taught them letters, read scripture aloud, and told them often, "Don't let your hunger of the belly or the heart turn you into monsters." The chaplain wrote, "He spoke your name with reverence, Miss Whitfield. You saved him from despair." Clara pressed the letter to her chest. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not only for Jonah's wasted life, but for the redemption that had blossomed in his last days. The tale of the Macabre Brothers became legend in Pikeville. Some told it as a ghost story to frighten children. Others told it as a cautionary tale. But Clara, who lived into old age, told it differently. To her pupils and their children, she said, "Yes, evil was done. But remember, evil often grows from suffering, from wounds the world ignores. That is why we must care for one another, so no one grows desperate enough to do such things." On her deathbed, Clara's Bible still held Jonah's first letter. Inside its pages was a truth too often forgotten. Hunger can make a person cruel, but compassion, even for the lost, can make them whole. And so, in the shadow of the Appalachians, where fog clung to the hills and whispers carried on the wind, the story of the Mountain Inn lived on, not just as horror, but as a reminder that even in darkness, there is always a chance for light.